Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Aubrey Reeves, CEO of Business and Arts. Before we begin, I'd first like to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm a white settler speaking to you from Toronto. I have the honor to be a guest on the traditional lands and waters of the Petun and Wendat peoples and the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee confederacies, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, as well as many other Indigenous nations, some of whose names are no longer remembered. By saying the names of its original keepers, we remember that this territory continues to be subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Three Fires Confederacy of the Anishinaabe to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. All year round, but particularly as we mark National Indigenous History Month this June, we acknowledge all those who came before us and have traveled the lands and waters of this territory. We're so grateful to have the opportunity to work, to live, and to meet on these lands. Today's session is the 10th installment of the Arts Response Tracking Survey, a partnership between Business and Arts, the National Arts Centre, and Nanos Research, which provides the arts sector with a deeper understanding of Canadians' attitudes on returning to indoor, outdoor arts and cultural events across Canada. This survey was in the field in late May. I'd like to first thank Nanos for their continued hard work on the Arts Response Tracking Survey project and founding partner NAC for their continued support and commitment. I'd also like to thank supporters David Bennett and NAC Foundation donors Irfan Raji and Christine Armstrong. This webinar is also included in our monthly Business and Arts speaker series, so I'd also like to thank the series presenting partner, Power Corporation of Canada. We'll get started in a moment, but just a few small housekeeping items. At the end of the session, there will be an open Q&A period, which I will be moderating. Only the presenters and moderators will have our microphones on today, so please submit your questions in the Q&A box early and vote for the ones you think are most relevant. The session is scheduled for 1 hour and 15 minutes to allow ample time for questions. We also are happy to have ASL interpreters Cynthia and Rogue from Toronto Sign Language Interpreter Service with us here today. So now let's get started today's session with a presentation of the research findings by Nik Nanos. Nik is Chief Data Scientist and founder of Nanos Research, which is one of Canada's most distinguished research companies. Nik is the official pollster for CTV News and the Globe and Mail and Bloomberg News in Canada. He's also a global fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and a research professor at the State University of New York and is past chair of Carleton's University Board of Governors. After Nik's presentation, we'll hear from our response panel. So with that, I will pass the microphone over to Nik.
Thanks, Aubrey. And actually, the most important thing in my bio is that I work with Aubrey and the arts community, because that's more not to diminish anything else that I've been doing, but that's actually good for the soul, if I might say. So I'm going to share my screen and do a walk through the latest tracking that we have. And the other thing that I'd like to add, another housekeeping issue is that if you have any questions related to the research itself, please post it in the chat. So I will be participating in the chat actively and answering all the questions that you may have for all those data geeks out there, and also for any suggestions that you might have for business in the survey at the end of May. The accuracy, at least for the sample of culture-goers, is about 3.6 percentage points, 19 times out of 20. And one of the things you'll see that there are some new things that we've added to the tracking study because we're in a new phase of the transition in the post-pandemic period. And we wanted to kind of add some new dimensions to the research. And, you know, what's interesting is that when we unpack what I'll see the expected timeline to return to art and culture events, what's interesting is that, you know, we have to remember that this particular study and the survey results that we're presenting is exclusively of individuals who are patrons of the arts and culture. But, you know, you can see one of the key takeaways is that whether it's a museum, an indoor art or cultural performance, or an outdoor art and cultural performance, is still between 1 out of every 4 and 3 out of every 10 culture goers are still unsure as to whether whether they will return or not. The good news is that you can see in that really dark sliver, still only about 1 out of every 20 said that they'll never return. So, that's actually quite a low number, but you can see that a significant proportion have been reporting that they have returned or gone back to a number of the cultural activities, ranging anywhere from 38 to 48%, depending on what that cultural activity is. So the key takeaway here is that even though we are in a period of transition in the post-pandemic, that restrictions are being loosened by governments and public health authorities, there's still a significant proportion of culture goers that are unsure when they're going to come back. And I think it's one of those things where that's probably should be the next priority, not for the folks that have come back because they've already made that step forward in order to kind of re-engage in arts and cultural activities in person. The big question is how do we get what I'll say the next round of culture goers to come back? And, as a follow-up to the question, when we ask people what was needed to come back, you can see quite interestingly that the top item that was actually mentioned was masks. And you can notice in this particular question that it is an open-ended question, which means culture goers could say whatever they wanted. But regardless of who they were, whether they're waiting to come back or already coming back, masks were the top item that was identified as the precaution that was necessary. The other thing that's important is for those people that have returned, they say nothing needs to be in place. You can see 28% for them to feel comfortable among indoor culture goers, and then follow that social distancing. Also of note, for those that reported that they will never go back, and that's a very small minority, remember we said only 1 out of every 20, they were much more likely, a quarter of those individuals were more likely to say everyone getting vaccinated or having a vaccine mandate being the top item. But one of the things that we wanted to unpack, and one of the new questions that we asked was, here we go, motivators. What would motivate one person to decide to attend an in-person arts and cultural experience? And I thought this was interesting that when we looked at motivations as opposed to precautions, at the very top of the list was actually not wearing a mask. It was actually something that was interesting or fun. Perhaps that speaks to the programming that could be appealing in order to get the next wave of individuals who want to come back to arts and cultural events, but who have not yet come back, to get them to cross over the line for them to make their first step to kind of re-engage in person the arts and culture community. But I thought it was quite interesting that, for that item that could help move that cohort forward, it wasn't necessarily masks. It actually had to do with programming. Perhaps this is a lens of the type of programming that might be able to entice kind of the next round of culture goers to re-engage and show up in person. We also tested on comfort levels with a single ticket purchase or an annual subscription or membership. And what you can see from the research is that a very, very strong majority of culture goers actually are quite comfortable, 83%, with a single ticket purchase to kind of support their favorite favorite arts and culture organization. And that's up, over the last 18 months, a full 30 percentage points, from 53% to 83%. But when it comes to an annual subscription or membership, that commitment, which is a little different, much more intense than what I'll say the single ticket purchase, the numbers have moved up, but only by about 16 percentage points, from 27 to 43%. And I think this is what kind of speaks to what I'll say the partial tentativeness that is out there in the marketplace when it comes to the commitment that arts and culture goers are willing to make. That the comfort level with a single ticket is good, but because of potential uncertainty, the comfort level with annual subscription or a membership has been improving, but it's still much lower than a single ticket purchase. You know, when we asked, this was quite interesting, when we asked about the things that individuals are most likely to do or visit, you can see, at least, and we tested on a wide variety of items, including just going to a public park through to park or beach, through to movie theaters or an outdoor music festival. We can see, and maybe this has to do with the weather, because it was just completed just a few weeks back, that public park or beach was about just as popular between lapsed culture goers and culture goers who have already returned. Not a big surprise that, you know, if you were a culture goer who has returned, you are twice as likely to report having gone to an indoor performing arts venture compared to lapsed. Movie theaters being comparable, factoring the margin of error between both lapsed and people that have already returned. And the other interesting thing, a little outside of the margin of error, had to do with a sports arena or going to a sports arena or stadium. Marginally more likely to lapsed culture goers, marginally more likely to report that compared to others, and similar numbers for an outdoor music festival. So before I give you my final thank you, the long and the short is this. First of all, people are increasingly being comfortable or have a level of comfort with making single ticket purchases. And also they're increasingly more comfortable with making that annual commitment, but it's not as strong as the single ticket commitment. Second of all, although a significant proportion of culture goers have already returned, there's still a noticeable number of culture goers that are still unsure. But what's interesting is that the top precaution has to do with masks, but the top motivator for them to come back to live experiences is actually programming, something that's interesting and fun. So with that, Aubrey, I'm going to pass it back to you, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nick. Really interesting as always. And as he said, if you have questions about the data or methodology, put it in the chat, and we will have Nick answer that while we are going through our panel discussion. So now I'm delighted to introduce our guest panelists. First up, we have Nadine Villasein-Feldman from Museum of Toronto. And Nadine has been engaging diverse communities through cultural programming and meaningful participation in the arts for more than 20 years. As a director of programming at Museum of Toronto, she has built collaborative partnerships resulting in a wide range of programs, such as the Wigwam Cheechimong, of which was a floating arts installation and Indigenous Learning Center in partnership with Elder Duke Redbird, 1851 Spirit and Voice, which was a theatrical and digital experience revisiting the 1851 Anti-Slavery Convention, and Making Space, Stories of Disabled Youth, which was an online storytelling program. Previously, as the artistic director of the Carlos Bulasan Theater and co-founder of the youth-led Kapisanan Philippine Center for Arts and Culture, Nadine developed multi-arts events and festivals that have nurtured a vibrant community of Filipino-Canadian artists in Toronto. Up next, second on our panel is Brenda Lieberman, who is the festival director, co-founder, and lead programmer for the Calgary Underground Film Festival. And she's also the lead programmer for the Calgary International Film Festival. In addition, she has film production experience. She's a member of IATSE 212 and has been involved with several other startup film festivals and participated on industry juries and panels internationally. In 2009, Brenda was awarded Avenue Magazine's Top 40 Under 40, and in 2018, she was awarded Distinguished Alumni from the MacEwan University Arts and Cultural Management Program. Most recently, Brenda was the executive producer of a talent to watch film called Events Transpiring Before, During, and After a High School Basketball Game, which recently completed the festival circuit. So congratulations, Brenda, on that. And finally, we have Melissa Carmen Lee, who is the Director of Education and Public Programs at the Vancouver Art Gallery, where she oversees public programs designed for diverse audiences of all ages to enhance the understanding of the gallery's 12,000-piece art collection and of touring contemporary and modern exhibitions. Since the start of the pandemic, Melissa has co-founded and spearheaded such popular online digital initiatives such as Arts Connect, Arts at Home, and Virtual School to the Vancouver Art Gallery's growing local and international audiences. Before joining the gallery, she was on the founding team to open Tai Kwan Center for Heritage and Arts in Hong Kong, which is a UNESCO heritage site, and serving as the education and public program curator in 2016 to 2019. In 2016, she was the scholar in residence at the David Lamb Center at Simon Fraser University, and she was on the faculty of as a senior lecturer at the English Department of Chinese University of Hong Kong. So a welcome to Melissa as well. So everybody on our panel today are in one way or another programmers, and Nik did make a comment about the relevancy of programming for the Lapsed Culture-goers. So let's start with that most striking finding, really, that culture-goers, to paraphrase Cyndi Lauper, just want to have fun. As three cultural programmers, what do you take from this, and how are you going to respond in your programming going forward? Anybody can jump in on that first one.
Well, I'll jump in. We just had a film festival, and you know, when I look at the programming over the years, we could look at it as individual films, or we could look at it holistically as an experience of programming. So one thing that I feel like over the years, when you're trying to build your audience and your reputation, we spend so much time on all the details that help us to build those audiences, whether it's with the volunteers, the consistency in concession, some of the added elements through sponsorship and giving. So whether there's like something free when people come into the cinema, or something exciting and different about what they're experiencing in the festival atmosphere in a curated environment versus if they didn't come at all and just watched it at home, which is what people have been used to. So I feel like there's been, you know, over the years where we grew, we started to maybe take some of the growth for granted and some of those extras for granted. And over the last couple of years, I think that's something that's really kind of settled into our minds as we've just come back to cinema. And we want to create a fun and engaging space for everybody. So we want other people to know and see what they're missing out on if you don't come to our festival. So we need to really kind of light that fire under our entire team's butts. And it's like our partnerships, how can we build those back up and have them be more exposed at the event and creating that excitement? And our team, our films that we're choosing again, but also just everything right across the board, because we want this experience to be our top game right now every time, because our word of mouth is you're gonna tell a friend that you had a lot of fun at this event. So the next screening we hold, or the next event we hold, we want that word of mouth to spread so people can now feel like they are missing out on something if they don't attend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nadine, you want to jump in on the question of fun?
Sure. I mean, I think to Brenda's point about, you know, the years that you spend cultivating an audience through your programming and creating an experience for your visitor, for your audience. I think ideally you're always considering the needs of your participant, your audience, and thinking about what that experience is for them and why they might want to come. So I think in essence, I mean, it's the work that we do all the time, all along. But now at this point in time, I think it's about consciously understanding that what audiences may need right now. I mean, Museum is known, you know, for hosting program that talks about, you know, serious topics and issues and addresses issues that are important in the city. But certainly we have recognized that coming out of a pandemic, coming out of you know, being stuck in our homes for so many years, that people are looking for an experience that is fun, maybe more uplifting. So that's something that we consider, but in every way that you're ideally always being responsive to the needs of your audience, your community. And so it's really an extension of that, is just really considering what do our audiences need right now.
Mm.
Yeah, for me, I think for us at the gallery, the key is really, in a way, re-engagement. We continue to engage through digital programs during the pandemic, but of course, the coming back into the gallery, in-person programs, I think like everyone else, we're doing it in stages and we're gauging comfort levels. So for example, a room in which we might have 100 people for a talk before the pandemic will only have 60 people. And so we're gauging comfort levels of our audience as well as our own staff and our own artists in what makes sense at this moment in time. And then, of course, also thinking about time. People's time was always precious, but there's a kind of another level to the way that people view or think about their own free time during the pandemic, because people in the end just ended up going out less. And that was a kind of habit that was forming. And so we're kind of thinking about, similar to what Brenda said, how do we make this really worth it for you? How do we re-engage?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to be able to dig into a number of the things that you've pointed to here, but let's get into some specifics about the recent experiences all of you had. So first, Brenda, after 2 years of online festivals in November 2021 and then April 2022, the Calgary Underground Film Festival hosted some successful hybrid festivals. Can you tell us a little bit about how that format was received and if you found the trends in audience behavior really matched Nik's data or if they varied considerably?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we are one of the fortunate disciplines that were able to be online when things were shut down. And each year in each festival, we did get shut down almost moments before. So we had this platform created. What we've noticed since we've been able to be back is a few things. Definitely, April was way better than November. November really just tested our crew on rehearsal almost for having an event. The attendance was way lower in November than in person than any of our previous events ever before. So it what that showed to us is how important the community and the experience was for people, because when we had our really hardcore fans show up in November, even they were everyone was a little bit like, we miss this. Like, we want to experience other people again and the other festival goers and the conversation. So it was exciting, but a little bit deflating. And it was a way for us to kind of start to rethink how we wanted to do it. So when we came back in April, we came back full force and the numbers did align. We were about 30% down in attendance from our online and previous in-person festivals. The shifts have changed. The audience, we found our hardcore pass holders did buy again, which was great. They were those fans who have been bought in for years with us. And their habits have even changed a bit, where we saw that it looked like they watched even more content because they were used to cramming in even so much more between the hybrid and online last year. So that need to watch more stuff was there. We did find single tickets were down a little bit across the board, but they were more last minute. So I think it comes to the competition of events now, people not knowing if they're comfortable, people not knowing if they're going to feel well. So there was a lot with the single ticket buyers. Those were a later game. And we also weren't sure if they were going to show up. So that is something that we had to consider. But once people realized, we found that once people walked through the door and saw that there was things in place, like some precautions, we kept it capacity lower just for comfort level. And we didn't mandate masks, we can't, but we made them encouraged. We put signs everywhere and we made sure 75% of our staff, volunteers, and team were wearing them at all times. So it was like a lead by example environment. So those who felt comfortable would do it. And I think once the audience started to realize that it was like fun to be back and there was people to talk to, we saw an increase as the festival progressed for more and more people to want to come. But we've got our work cut out for us.
Thanks. So Nadine Museum is a museum of Toronto, and you present programming throughout the city. In April, you returned to presenting Intersections, which is your citywide festival, and that was for the first time in 2 years. Festival included 5 collaborative projects with more than 30 artists and 10 community collectives, all in different neighborhoods throughout the city. So it was very geographically dispersed. How did you go about trying to reconnect with audiences in that situation?
So just to clarify, we had held previous versions of Intersections in the years before, just online. So it was our first return back to in-person programming. And yeah, the question is, how did we reconnect with audiences? That's a great question. It was, so we were quite fortunate throughout the pandemic. We transitioned very quickly from in-person programming to digital programming and didn't actually really lose audiences. And in fact, in many cases, we were able to expand our capacity for audiences because we're no longer limited to like 100-person room, 100-person venues. And so in that sense, throughout the pandemic, it had not been challenging for us to be engaging with our audiences. And the digital versions of Intersections were certainly not far off, not really different in the previous COVID years. But this year, coming back into COVID, our festival happened just after the mask mandates, the first mask mandates lifted in Ontario, and things started to open up again. And it was really unclear as to where, it was really hard to gauge how people were going to be going back into the world, participating in events. What we tried to do was, we were lucky in that we kind of tried to balance the program out by having we had walking tours, and we had events that we live streamed, we had digital programs, so we still had a mix of program. But even those which we consistently, like our digital programming throughout the pandemic, we didn't have a hard time engaging audiences. When everything started to open up, people's behavior was really hard to gauge. So our digital engagement for Intersections dropped. Like, it was really unexpected. And I think in the past, what we would have really done too was relied on the partnerships, the community partnerships and their relationships in those different communities throughout the city. But I think even our partners, in some cases, our partners were having a real challenge, connecting with their own audiences, their own communities. So it was a challenge. And certainly this year, we relied more on digital marketing than we had in previous years. But yeah, it was that initial transition. That festival sat right in that transition. And so I have to say it was a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and speaking of digital programming, Melissa, you were responsible for quite a lot of digital programming throughout the pandemic, including Arts Connect and Vancouver at Home, Vancouver Gallery at Home. Are you finding certain programs are actually more suited to staying online? And then from what you've learned over these past 2 years, are you taking some new approaches to the in-person experiences you're now offering?
First of all, thanks so much, Aubrey, for inviting me to this webinar, and thanks to Business Arts. And yes, so for me, I'm zooming into everyone's webinar or computer from Vancouver, the unceded territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And for us, digital programming was really important. And it was actually the first time we ever did digital programming during the pandemic. So before the Vancouver Art Gallery, we didn't have any digital programs. And it was really because we shut down in March 2020 for a couple months that we immediately went online and had to pivot. So in a way, it was a kind of continuation of our brand identity and a continuation of the way that we continue to engage our audiences online during a period when we couldn't open to the public. And so to your question about whether some programs are better online, I mean, what we noticed was a lot of international audiences would Zoom in. We were able to bring in international speakers. So for example, if we wanted a particular professor to speak on climate change in art, and that professor was in Los Angeles, we wouldn't, of course, normally have the budget to bring him in just for a talk, but we could, easily engage him via an honorarium and have him Zoom in. Similarly, we had a performance artist perform from Sydney, Australia, and he did a Zoom performance. So all of these things were really great, and we were able to be so experimental and in a way that wouldn't really have been possible without the pandemic, allowing us to be more experimental and flexible. So I think we're really taking those lessons going forward, and we're really kind of hoping to continue engaging international audiences and international speakers while keeping our Canadian audience. I think something else that we've done in terms of new approaches to the in-person experiences, we've really kind of created a lot of new partnerships. So it's not just our own institution that is coming back to a kind of re-engagement, but a lot of other institutions in the city, of course. And we're all thinking of the same audiences. So it makes sense for us to partner. I mean, a good example is we just started doing new music concerts at the gallery. We're partnering with the Canadian Music Centre BC. And in a way, we're sharing and growing audiences together, which is really great, and meeting and collaborating with new colleagues too.
That's great. So you alluded earlier to habits, and that's what my next question is about. There's a lot of different research about how long it takes to form or break a habit. Some studies show it's as little as 21 days, other it's 8 months, but either way, it's we have really exceeded those lengths of time during the periods of shutdowns and closures. So it's pretty fair to say that audiences have gotten out of the habit of attending arts and culture experiences. And as Nik showed, there's roughly a third of respondents who have yet to come back, and they say they're unsure of when they're going to come back. So, and maybe they have formed some other habits during the pandemic besides going to arts and culture. So really, what can we collectively as the arts sector do to help rebuild those art going habits? And this is really for anyone. This is a challenging one. This is what we're all really grappling with.
Yeah, are you gonna go, Nadine?
I wasn't sure. If you want to go, I can follow.
I don't know. Somebody in the chat asked me this question too. Like, I mean, again, we're in a little with our discipline of media art and film. Everyone had switched to watching online the last few years, and the rate in which films got released, because they weren't releasing in cinema, to streamers was outside of the norm for our industry. So we're finding ourselves in a little bit of a position where we, the audiences they don't want to not support the organizations. They want to watch the stuff online. We're running out of the ability to continue to do everything online because our industry is going back to the way it was in 2019, bit by bit. So we're trying to find a way to reverse people's habits now to what they just, like our surveys, every single person was like, please don't lose hybrid. Please don't stop doing online stuff. And yet we're fighting with this because it's like we miss seeing those people there. We want the accessibility and the outreach, people who maybe wouldn't have been able to come to our venue before. But we also are running up against what our industry is going to start to change again and how they're adapting, and it's not going to be our control. So, I guess we're just challenged with a bit of trying to figure out how to convince our audiences that what we were doing online and these habits that have been changed the last 2 years, 3 years, are not going to be able to stay with our film festival format indefinitely the way they would hope it would. So it doesn't really answer the question, but we're trying to think about what to do, because they've grown so accustomed to it. And I think it's probably going to go back to the first question, which is, how do we prove and show to them that these things are events? It's not just watching a movie online anymore. It could be one and done. The film's no longer, everything that was completely accessible before won't be. So you will miss out. If you don't, this opportunity to see this speaker or filmmaker or Q&A or this incredible movie that is best experienced with an audience, to laugh, to cry, freak out, is only gonna be able to have this experience in cinema. So if you don't come, you're gonna miss out. So I don't know, that's where the option to do both is gonna disappear. And then I think there's gonna be that bit of that FOMO.
Yeah, capitalizing on FOMO. Okay.
Yeah.
Nadine, do you have further ideas?
I mean, I don't have a grasp on it any better than Brenda, I don't think, but I think this idea of like accessibility, and what we would provide like a recording of all our programs afterwards, as I'm sure many of us are and have been. But there's also, now that, programming has come into such a digital space, there's also pressure for what those production values are. And so we're having conversations around digital content about, like, do we just want to be throwing anything up that has like, do we only want to be putting up programs that are a little bit more produced as we start to move forward coming out of the pandemic? So there is a similar question of, like, are we just going to be offering everything, through live stream or like, a recorded version of the event? And the answer is, we certainly don't have the capacity to do both. I do think, just in the interim and right now, as we're bringing people back out, I think certainly, considering format is still important. And in our case, that means that we're doing a lot of pop-up events that are outdoors, but also when we do indoor events at our new project space, we're strongly encouraging masks. And we actually decided as a staff recently, because we had a social event, we had an event called City Social, because we recognized that, a lot of people are wanting to connect, especially, I've met so many people myself recently or through program who moved to the city in the middle of the pandemic, which is like a terrible way to connect with the city and to connect with other people. So we decided to hold some social events. But what we did was, is that we asked that people be masked, and we asked that they be vaccinated, but we didn't check it. I will confess, we didn't check it at the door, because we didn't want, it was just a point of, like, I guess, comfort at the beginning to say, like, if you're comfortable with that, then you'll come, but we didn't actually check it at the door. So I think there's a lot of conflict over it. Once the province kind of just opened everything up, there was a lot of onus placed on us as arts organizations to make certain decisions about visitor comfort, and what that means and what that looks like. So it's been a challenge.
Yeah. So picking up on this social idea, a lot of pre-pandemic art-going behavior often relied on social peer pressure and a feeling of momentum in your day. So, for example, you might be out at work, and then you go out for drinks after work with your coworkers or friends, and then you continue the momentum, and you end up going to a concert or a film or a play or something. It's a lot easier to convince people to go to things when they're already out and about. But those social behavior patterns have really been disrupted. There's still a significant number of people working from home at least part of the time. It's a lot harder to convince people to leave their house and go out for a night on the town. So I'm wondering, Melissa, what ways are you rethinking programming to address this social aspect?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, for us, a lot in the programming department, a lot of what we do is to try to be responsive to the audience. And we have noticed a kind of change in trends and what people want. A lot of people are still hybrid or working partially from home. Maybe they're only going in 2 days or 3 days a week. So that kind of changes the pattern of what time they'd like to go out. We've been experimenting with webinar times. We have found that lunch times are the best in terms of attendance for webinars. If we do it later in the day, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, we see a dip in audience numbers. In-person programming, we've also noticed that we have a better response if we do it earlier in the evening. So for example, a music concert that we used to do, or a talk that we used to do at 7, we actually have people prefer that we do it earlier, Fridays at 5, because people have a more flexible schedule now. So all of that are really kind of things that help us understand what people want and where best for audience. It's always about excellent programming, but it's also about these kind of operational logistics that make people kind of decide, okay, I will go out and I will go to that event or that program tonight, I think. So yeah, that's, I think, the ways that we've thought about rethinking program to address like the ongoing needs of the pandemic as it evolves.
So there was some good news in Nick's report about the comfort of audiences buying single tickets. It was up 30 points. But anecdotally, I'm hearing quite a lot about no-show rates are extremely high. People buy a ticket and then they aren't arriving. And Brenda, you did mention that briefly. You saw some of that no-show. What can we infer from this trend, and what kind of impact is it having? I mean, we make the money off the revenue of the ticket, but then you have empty seats. What kind of impact are you seeing from that?
Yeah, I was trying to think a bit about it because, I was wondering if it's because our ticket prices are lower than some other arts events, less than concerts and theater. Although we did just hold an event that was a little bit higher ticket price, and we were seeing still some no-shows. I think we just have to, we're not gonna sell to full 100% capacity for a while. And I think we're just mitigating our expectations a little bit of what it looks like in the space. And the audience at the end of the day doesn't notice if, when we think about it, they don't notice if 15% don't show up or 20% don't show up with the tickets. It just gives a little bit more elbow room. So I think we're just kind of trying to, we have room to oversell because we're not selling at 100% capacity still yet. So we're just getting used to this change in habit. And I think some people, again, they don't feel well, they don't show up. The number of competing events that people didn't expect, it's the social calendar dilemma. They're not used to being invited or having so many things to do. And I think that that's probably why more people will choose to now buy more last minute than in advance, because they're in this like social conundrum. And that's probably where some of the no-shows are coming from as well. So it seems to be varying between different film screenings and event, and I'm hoping it gets better, but we've noticed it for sure.
Okay. There was also a positive upswing on comfort for committing to an annual membership or subscription, not as high, but 16 points is definitely an improvement. Vancouver Art Gallery has memberships and special programming dedicated to it. So Melissa, what are you seeing in your membership trends? Are they returning to that pre-pandemic level? Is it different people? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a couple of different things. I mean, we're actually in a week or so, we'll be launching a new membership system. We've also announced recently that kids under 18 are free. So that's already changed the way that we've thought about memberships, right? Like we no longer have family memberships because kids are free. So we're kind of rethinking this whole idea of membership at the gallery. And that I think we'll be ready, to go public with that like fairly soon. I think also what's been great for us is because we've, as I mentioned, we've started to do a lot of partnerships with organizations, like music organizations, like other community organizations. We've seen an upswing in single ticket buying for programmed events. We started new programs like summer camps, and we see people that are non-members that are buying. And I think for us, when we see these non-members buying these programs, it's almost to me like perhaps it's their first time that they've even come visited us, and they just want to try it out, and that's fine, and that's great. And in a way, it's our job to make sure that they want to come again and again. And then hopefully buy a membership and we make it worth their while.
Yeah. So mentioning partnerships, that's my next question. Nadine, you noted that partnerships are really important for intersections, for relaunching those in-person events. How do you think partnerships overall can help rebuild the relationships with our lapsed culture goers?
Yeah, I mean, I think partnerships are always going to help. I mean, it's, the majority of our programming has been in partnership with community organizations and or collectives, groups. And so I think community partnerships are always, organizational partnerships are always going to be, a very, are always going to be a good way to help build audience and build awareness of the work that you do, regardless of when you're doing it. But certainly, yeah, I think partnerships in combination with content is potentially a very strong and compelling reason for people to come out to something at this time. Like we partnered with a group called the Quiet Immigrant Project on an exhibit and a series of events that honored the women who immigrated to Canada and to Toronto post World War II, and it was a storytelling exhibit and an exhibit that really honored the stories of these women. And the community came out in droves, and so like I'm talking, the first day we had over 300 people in a space, which was very shocking to me. That's the first time that I had been in a room masked, but still with that many people. But I think it was because there was such deep community engagement in that project. So many members of the community contributed to that project, contributed their personal items and memorabilia and things to that exhibit. And so I think it's certainly linked to the success of engaging those audiences.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so go ahead, Brenda.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think we had noticed, this year we didn't raise our percentage of new people coming to the festival. We have an increase every year and of the people who've never been before. And I think we kind of keep touching on it is partnerships and word of mouth and spreading the word about these events that we've kind of over the years, again, maybe we've taken for granted how important that is for arts and cultural events to get their attendance back up, because with it harder and harder to get print advertising in media and reviews and articles, and with people moving off of social media, the best way for anyone to build their base is really, you tell somebody and they tell somebody and our partner does a promo through their office, or we, I don't know how else except for really getting everyone who's passionate about your arts group to buy into it, because we kind of really need the force of everybody to help build back that audience of the ones who haven't been trying new events or returning. And those are the ones that we need to build in. Once they come, they'll be hooked, right? Probably with everyone's event. We just got to get them there like we used to. And I think we're trying to get our partners to help support that with us and each other is probably going to be our best tool.
So word of mouth is still the best advertising. Okay, the last question before we go to the audience is, as much as we want it to be, the pandemic is not in fact over. Already we're seeing a wave of BA.5 in the UK and Europe, which is starting to pick up here. Experts are warning us to expect fall winter waves again, and that we'll all need seasonal booster shots. So assuming that we're now dealing with COVID on a cyclical basis, how are we going to plan for those ups and down periods when audiences are comfortable in being in public spaces?
I mean, I'll begin. I think in terms of planning for the fall and winter, you know, our first programming in the fall is a series of walking tours. And then after that, the programming we have technically is meant to be in our space, but it's structured in a way that could be easily digital programming. So we're planning it now with the expectation, we're planning it now with the idea that it may be in our space, but with the expectation that it may be online. And that maybe the cycle of programming is, you know, in the winter it's digital, and in the summer, the spring, summer, we could start to come out into the world a little bit.
I mean, I'd have to say that it feels like we have a lot of experience already with up and down planning over these past 3 years, because, you know, so far the pandemic has been cyclical with the new variants, and we've had to react so quickly in all of our different institutions. And it's almost like a continuation of the new normal if it continues, I have to say.
I will say though, Melissa, that absolutely, yes. But I think what is harder to navigate, like our planning cycle, we can pivot quickly. And I think we all have had to do that year after year. It's not like year one, we figured it out. Like year two, something new came along in Ontario, we completely shut down. Like you couldn't even like record things because at one point, you know, we had a stay-at-home order. So the online programming that we thought we were going to go out and film things, we couldn't even do that. So that was a new one. And we thought that we had really planned well for that year. I think the harder part is to really consider the toll that it takes on the staff to have to pivot quickly, to have to like rework something. And the best that we can do is to try to plan that in so that we're not like that. It's not this, that it doesn't become, you know, that we're constantly just dealing with these tight turnarounds because suddenly everything's changing. And hopefully, because we've experienced it like, you know, 2 years in a row now, that we're able to plan with a little bit more of a runway, a planning runway. Whereas in the first couple of years, we were like pivoting so quickly. We thought things were going to go, and they close up again. So we have to pivot again. And so hopefully what we're learning is to be able to plan that in, plan the potential pivoting in, and make a little buffer for that.
Yeah. Brenda, did you want to touch on this before we go to our audience?
We're kind of the same. We are always willing and ready to pivot, and we've got our platform set up now for as long as we can keep it going. I think it's just balancing internal capacity and fatigue to the extent of it. And we're prepared for whatever we need to. I think we do a few tweaks, and I'm sure we will in the fall. Like we won't, you know, plan too many parties and certain things that, you know, you would have to put money into in advance that was really going to be affected if there's a big change. So I think we're just going to still be cautious while planning some of the extra activities, and look for other ways to enhance the experience without having some of our complete 2019 experiences back.
So the first question I'll go to from the audience is a little bit also about patterns of programming. So any recommendations for the frequency in which to hold events, whether online, hybrid, or in person? For example, due to considerations of Zoom fatigue plus hesitation to attend in-person indoor events. So how often do you feel like you're going to be programming?
Yeah, I mean, I can just say quickly, like I think just in terms of capacity of our team, of my team in particular, you know, we first only did in-person programming, and then because of the pandemic, we only did digital programming, and now we do both. So in a way, it's kind of a double load on my small department. And so we're navigating that. So we're navigating capacity of our own team. And I think in terms of audience, Zoom fatigue, it's really kind of important to think about ways to diversify audiences, right? So if you're doing a program on art and health, it'll be different from a program on family, like, you know, or a kind of talk on the collection, or it's kind of different people that go to all different ones. And we can see that because we can see audience registration, that it's actually appealing to different people. So in a way, I think fatigue is easily negotiated with a diversity of programming. But I think for me, what I worry a lot about is staff capacity going forward.
Yeah, I think we're all feeling that. A kind of related question, thoughts on comps or complimentary tickets to fill seats for performances or shows versus selling tickets at lower cost or full cost. Is just bringing people back at this point more useful, or does that make audiences expect free tickets going forward?
I think there's more no-shows with free tickets. I think it kind of gives you a false number going into an event, and we see more no-shows with comps than we would with people who've paid. So I think, I don't know, we all get in that headspace where we want to get more people in the room for that experience or for the artist, but I don't know, I feel like my opinion has changed on it a little bit more now than it was pre-pandemic, and or I guess we're still in it, but I do think some reduced pricing or some promos, or you know, what somebody said for youth, like we did offer free for youth, but under a certain age, but we knew in most cases that an adult might come with them. We also tried to partner with organizations. So I think there's something to be said for seeing if you could try and do a promo ticket with partners versus too much of papering the house. Or a cheaper like price, like a bundle, or a, you know, we sell memberships to get discounts on your tickets. So, you know, we could see a direct correlation. If we have an event that's a ticket price and somebody wants the deal, they'll buy the membership. So I don't know.
Yeah. Nadine, most of your events are not ticketed, right? So
Well, they're ticketed, but they're free.
yeah.
So our regular like drop-off rate is usually like fairly at 50% for in-person and online. So we'll have like 400 people register and only 200 people show up, and that's pretty consistent. That's pretty consistent online or in person.
I was going to say that that's been what we've found as well. Any free registration, it's about a 40% to 50% no-show.
Yeah, for sure. Nick has answered it in the chat, but I wanted to draw your attention to a question about the interesting and fun motivator. Are they two different ideas? Interesting can refer to intellectual or aesthetic stimulation or discovery. Fun really speaks to the entertainment values often associated with lighthearted content. Other surveys, including an earlier edition of Arts Response Tracking Survey, observed that culture-goers were looking forward to trying something different or new that would be more equated to interesting. So it's really a comment that this needs to be explored further, but I wondered if you guys had a take on this idea.
I have a take on it. I have
Yeah.
a take on it. So we did a program called 1851 Spirit and Voice, which was about the anti-slavery convention. It was about slavery. And we commissioned a playwright, Luke Reese, to create this kind of like digital choose your own adventure experience where the ghosts of this past convention kind of like crash a contemporary conference that's meant to look back. And so it was done in a really playful spirit, like the Luke brought a lot of, I don't know how else to put it, but playfulness to the script and to the presentation of the work. But obviously the material was, you know, was substantive and educational. And so I certainly think that something can be both, but are they different? Like, is fun and interesting different? Yeah, absolutely. Like you can have something that's interesting but not fun, and if what people are looking for is fun, but I think actually people, what they're looking for is interesting.
You're looking for engagement, right? Like you're looking for what is fun is so subjective, and it's like I think people are looking for like engagement, whether you know, with whatever the content is and the people who are there watching it with them, right? So that's what I feel like that's what people are missing out on, is that opportunity to experience everyone's art with others. And if you go and have a good experience listening to even the most depressing of topics, it could still be, there could still be something engaging and interesting and fun out of the overall experience, right? If you could find a way for people to talk.
So is it the collective, the social experience that is fun rather than the content?
That's what I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we have one last question asking, curious to know about what platforms or companies are the best for hybrid ticketing and digital offering, and any recommendations from your experiences.
We're all in different areas.
Yeah.
I mean, we're pretty, like what platform, like what ticketing platform? We just use Eventbrite.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all across the board, no one has some strong feelings about that one. All right, that is all of our questions from the audience. So I think we're going to wrap it up. It's been a really engaging discussion. Always enjoyable to have these sessions. So I want to thank everyone involved. Big thanks to Nik Nanos of Nanos Research for your continued partnership and expertise. Many thanks to our amazing panelists, Brenda Lieberman from the Calgary Underground Film Festival and Calgary International Film Festival, to Melissa Lee from the Vancouver Art Gallery, and Nadine Feldman from Museum in Toronto for all your thoughtful responses and for answering the questions from the audience. I'd like to also say thank you to the National Arts Center, and a thank you to our supporters, David Binnett, as well as Christine Armstrong and Irfan Raji, patrons for the National Arts Center Foundation, for their additional support. And finally, a big thank you to Power Corporation of Canada, who is the presenting partner of the Business and Arts Speaker Series. We will have one more session before breaking for the summer. So tune in on July 13th for a session where we will be sharing success stories and impacts from the previous round of Arts Fest, our signature mentorship and training program. You can visit the Business and Arts website or follow us on social media for future announcements of all of our webinars and other news. So many thanks, everybody. There are links being provided in the chat for all of those things, and the recording of today's session will be available. So take care and have a great summer, everyone.